All right, it's time to paint our hot air balloon. We're going to be thinking a lot about value with our hot air balloon, making the edges of each little bump out darker with the center light. So it's a lot of wet on wet, which means I'm going to start with one spot, doesn't really matter which one, and I'm going to add water. Quite a bit of water, but not puddles. So I want to make sure the whole paper is wet. If you notice the paper starts to absorb the paint, then add a little more water before you start painting. You want there to be a shiny surface of paper before you actually add the color. So far, I've only added water. Now I'm gonna pick whatever color I'm gonna pick. I might do a pattern of colors for this. So here I'm choosing red, and I'm gonna let my red kind of drip in, especially at the edges, because I mentioned I want it to go from dark to light. So I'm letting that paint fill in and spread on the edges, and then slowly let it go towards the center. I'm gonna dry off my brush so that I'm not adding any more color, and I'm just using the color that's already on there, making these edges dark and the center light. So this is a great thing to practice, and we're gonna do that all across our hot air balloon. Now what we wanna make sure we don't do is paint another wet area right next to the first wet area, because otherwise they'll bleed together. So you either need to dry this first spot so that you can paint next to it, or jump around. So I'm gonna be doing different patterns. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump to my next area that'll have that same red. So I'm gonna make every other row have the same pattern. So here I'm filling the next area with water as well, making sure there's a shiny surface of water on top. I have a tiny bit of the red still left in my paintbrush, but that's okay since I'm gonna paint with it anyways. Once the whole thing is wet, I'm gonna drip my paint in on the edge, bring it kind of towards the center, but not covering up all of it. I'm gonna dry or clean off my brush, and then I'll kind of let the center ones fade together. So look how the highlight's now in the middle. So if I can do this the same for all these squares, make the edges darker and the middle brighter, that will give the 3D effect of my hot air balloon. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that for all of my different sections, following my own pattern. You can choose whatever colors or pattern you want to use. All right, that will probably be the longest part of this painting, is just going piece by piece to make those look 3D, but I think it is so worth it. I love how they turned out, the shadows at the edges. One thing I've been doing too while I paint is going back when it's dry and adding a extra little layer of shadow right along the edge. So even if it's dry and it's gonna create a hard edge, you can see on my pinks and oranges where I already did it, I'm just going and adding a little bit of a hard shadow to really emphasize where it kind of dips down and bends towards its neighbor fabric. So that's one more thing to just kind of push that illusion. Another step further is to add those hard line edges at the very edges of each of those spaces. So see that little contrast it adds? One more thing. Now, of course, you don't always have to do every little thing that I do. I'm just showing you ideas, and I hope you take those and decide what to do on your own, because you can make your own masterpiece. We're just trying to find joy in the painting. So that's not something else you can try. And then we'll be moving on to our basket. We're not going to paint anything with the ropes. The ropes are just the black lines. We'll leave those the way they are. All right, one thing I just did there is I thought I had too much blue, so I dried my brush and I just lifted a little bit of the edge or a little bit of the wet paint to make it lighter. So with watercolor, you can kind of lift the paint off if it's still wet to some extent. You can't erase it completely, but if you dry your brush pretty quick and you go back on top of it, your brush will act like a sponge and soak up that paint and lift it off the paper. So something to definitely play with or try. I think I'm gonna pick one of my balloon colors to do the band at the bottom with. I'm gonna choose red, because why not? So I'm just gonna paint my wet paint on dry paper. So I'm just filling it in a nice even color so I don't have to do the same wet on wet technique I did for the balloon because I'm just trying to make it a solid stripe. So I'm just filling it in and smoothing it out. For the basket, I'm gonna maybe make this top rectangle one of my colors just to keep it interesting. So I'll do maybe my blue this time so I can connect these colors to the actual hot air balloon up top. But then I think I will make the basket baskety colors, so do some browns. So I'm gonna go ahead and wake up my brown paint, and I'm just gonna fill it in with a fairly light layer of brown first, watching out because I just painted that blue, and if my brown and blue touch when they're both wet, they're gonna mix and bleed together, which is not something I really want it to do. If it happened, I could of course turn mistakes into masterpieces, but I'm gonna try to avoid it since I can. So I'm just being careful to put my brush right up next to the blue, but not overlap them, hoping I can avoid any puddles. Now that I have my plain brown, I'm gonna just add some shadows different places. So maybe I'll do some shadow right underneath where that lip is, as if it's kind of sticking over and casting a shadow. Maybe I'll just draw along these wiggly lines, just because those kind of suggest a basket weave. So by following those with my paint, I can kind of add to the illusion of more shadows and let little bits of highlight show through. So you can play with that however you want. It's a great place to try different techniques, but I'm kind of just hoping to show more than one type of brown. Now I am seeing my attempt failed and some of that brown is bleeding up into the blue. So I got a dry brush and I'm just gonna kind of lift that out and pull my brush across to blend it away. So no big deal there. This very top spot is kind of an opening. I think I'm gonna make it one of these pinks or purples because then it will look like you can see inside the whole thing. So it just kind of disappears. It's like I'm looking down inside the balloon. So picking one of my colors that might be on the other side of the fabric. And there I have it. I have painted my hot air balloon. I've hopefully gotten a lot better at this wet on wet technique where I'm making it go from dark to light to dark again. And it really helps with that illusion of making this balloon look like it's popping off the page. So nice work. I hope you have fun on your next one as well. Happy painting.